one of the biggest questions in creativity, any form of creativity, is when is an idea that you have that pops up like a little champagne bubble in your mind worth pursuing? The answer to that is highly subjective. What appeals to you? What are you interested in as an artist or as someone aspiring to be an artist in cinema? What compels you to tell a story? Is it the visual aspects of it? Is it the world that you want to immerse people in? Is it a particular character? Is it a particular problem for a character that you want to explore, maybe based on how it resonates with something in your life, or maybe it's a story that you've read and say, I want to do something like that, or it's a film that you've seen and say, I want to do something like that. Maybe it's very unformed at first. Okay, there's this woman that does this. I want to tell this story, put some detail on it. Who is she? What time in the world is it? What's the setting? And how does that resonate? And maybe you put her in Cincinnati in 1962 and all of a sudden, it's too limiting socially. Maybe it needs to be in some dystopian future, and so just let it swirl around and don't lock in on anything right away. I mean, I think that one of the keys to this is to be open and flexible and always keep an openness. So really it's a question of, after that initial process, does the idea stand the sort of sniff test for something that you want to really devote your time to? And I think the answer to that is it just won't go away. The idea just won't go away. It starts to resonate with things that are happening in your life or in the news or in another film that you see, and it starts to get more detailed. It starts to come into focus. And then there'll be a certain point where you say, I've just got to sit down and write this. The imagination never stops. It's always working. And I think ideas come to any kind of artist from different sources, and the subconscious is one that certainly the surrealist artists back around the turn of the last century believed in. They believed in dream imagery. They believed that it was an unmediated, unintellectualized version of their subconscious creative force or imagination. And I believe that to be true also. It's my zero-cost subscription to a streaming service that's all my own. Every night I get all kinds of entertaining stuff. I know I've woken up having leafed through sketchbooks or paintings and thought to myself, man, I wish I could paint like that. And then realized I just did. And then scramble around and try to draw out the ideas that I've seen. And every once in a while something stands out, whether it's a scene in a narrative sense that might be tragic, it might be joyful, or maybe it's just an image. To pick an example, Terminator started as a dream image. The actual Terminator itself and the image of it as a chrome metal skeleton emerging out of a fire with the certain knowledge, in the same way that you have a certain knowledge in dreams about something, about what the thing you're seeing means, or the person that you're seeing, what they mean to you in the dream. I knew that it once had skin over it, which was burned off by the fire, and it was walking out of the fire. So I woke up and I said, that's a pretty good idea. And I started drawing what I had seen, and that was the nucleus for the Terminator. Then I had to justify, where am I? Why is there a metal skeleton? Why did it have skin over it? Well, obviously there was a purpose to that. And we don't have that, so that comes from the future. And hey, maybe I could make a movie about that in the present day if there was time travel. So boom, 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 all the pieces assembled around that nucleus of a dream image. You have an idea, what happens next? Well, there's this pesky little thing called the written word. You've got to write a story. Somebody has got to write a story at some point. Now, maybe it's a 5-page outline. Maybe in my case, it's a 75-page outline, because that's how I work. I work in a very novelistic way, because I have to build the world around the characters as I'm generating it, and because otherwise it's too vague, it's too imprecise. So in my particular case, I write a very long treatment. In fact, people used to joke that it was more of a script than a treatment. We, at first jokingly, and then ultimately just adopted the term scriptment. because it had all of the scenes and had a lot of the dialogue. It just wasn't in proper script form because I held on to that kind of novelistic way of writing prose and dialogue because it was freer, it was looser. I could say an argument happens, or I could actually write the argument out. So I tried to take the formality out of the process. This was just, I'm speaking for my own development, and all writers develop differently, all screenwriters develop differently. But I think anyone aspiring to be a filmmaker, the person sitting in this chair, still needs to understand the writing process, even if you know that one of your limitations is you're not great with dialogue, or you don't think structurally like a writer does, or mastering the art of the scene, because scene writing is an art in and of itself. Maybe that's not your thing, and you're more visual, and you just want to grab a camera and go and let somebody else write it. That's fine, but you still need to know how to work with the writer to get the story to be what you want it to be. I believe in the 3-act structure. I've just never succeeded in doing one. Terminator's 5 acts with a coda. Aliens is 4 acts. None of my stuff ever fits the 3-act structure. I think thinking in acts is good up to a point. It disciplines you to know that you're coming up to a transition point in the film. If you think in terms of act breaks, you'll create transitions that are interesting. They always say that you want to end Act 1 with some kind of sense of stating the main character's main problem, and if there's an adversary, pitting the main character against the adversary. There's certain things that need to be accomplished. Or the journey begins. You can follow different schools of thought around that. Shakespeare worked in a 5-act structure very often. So there are no hard rules. Quentin Tarantino takes the acts and just moves them around into different orders, So there are no real rules, but I think it's good to know the rules before you break them. When I'm standing at a whiteboard in a writer's room with other writers, it's very helpful to think in a 3-act structure because everybody gets that. What's my first act out? What is the big thing I want to do to really set the story in motion? All my kind of throat clearing and my establishing and my world building all has to culminate to some point where we've defined the conflict, we've set the character's problem, and now the story's in motion at high speed beyond that. So that's helpful. And then what do I need to accomplish in my second act? And then what's my kickoff for my third act? And then, because I often find that third acts are kind of a story within the story. That third act reiterates a lot of what's been seen previously and brings it all to a head and to either a final conflict or a final culmination or some kind of emotional catharsis, and then it resolves. Or in some cases it doesn't resolve, and the not resolving is part of the comment or part of the message. So I think, read the books. There are plenty of books on screenwriting. Read the books, know the rules, and then just break them. All art has meaning, and that meaning may be overt. It may be a lesson. It may be a social object lesson for something that needs to be understood and felt and requires an empathetic response. And maybe it has a meaning for you individually, some kind of object lesson about the value of duty or the value of friendship or the value of love or the price of love. I read an interesting quote. Grief is the price of love. It was a mother, not an artist, not a writer. It was a mother who had lost someone very close to them. I think a child, and it was just a quote in a newspaper. That she was hurting. She was in deep pain. She said, "It's the price of love." And I thought, that is profound. That is really profound. Of course, I mean, we all, love is a good thing, right? Right up until it isn't. When it hurts because you lose someone close to you, you lose contact with them, or they reject you, or they die, whatever it is, and there's a price to be paid. There's a price to be paid for everything. And so maybe that's the object lesson of the film. And maybe that allows us to go on that journey without having to go through the actual loss. So films are a way to kind of experience things like in a kind of a training simulation before we actually get there. So it's up to the filmmaker, I think, to be authentic about emotions. I mean, the actors, of course, they live, eat, and breathe authenticity. And it's all about the research for them and the truthful moment and all that. And I think it's up to the filmmaker to protect that and nurture that and make sure it's there, that the authenticity is there in the writing. I had a studio executive, top studio executive, say on Avatar, we really like this script, but is there a way that you can take out some of the kind of hippie, tree-hugging kind of stuff? And I said, no, because it's exactly the hippie, tree-hugging stuff is the reason I want to make the movie. So if that's important to you, then we're kind of done here, and I'll have to take it somewhere else. No. You know, so anyway, film got made with all the hippie, tree-hugging stuff in it. But, you know, it was a Rubicon moment. I could have been jeopardizing the financing for a, $100+ million movie, but, I found that as I developed my stories, there are certain things I never let go of. There are certain fundamental principles that I never let go of. Maybe it's a redemption story, and that never changes. So then it's a fine equipoise between being open and being fluid and being able to take an idea, maybe not your idea, but an idea that fits and resonates, and incorporate that without losing the sight of that core thing that you came there to do. All my films express thematically my perspective on existence, and a lot of those ideas were formed when I was just kind of wide-eyed looking around at the world.
Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
Remembering distinctly as a kid at the age of 8, seeing my dad going through how to build a fallout shelter in your basement at the peak of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Seeing the rise of environmentalism in the early 70s and seeing the world potentially becoming a toxic wasteland, and all those sorts of dystopian anxieties. So for me, the nuclear holocaust of the future in Terminator maps directly thematically to the destruction of Titanic, where people just kind of blithely sailed on right into an iceberg, and their world, the microcosm, the world of that movie, because you see very little besides the ship itself in that film, sinks out from underneath them, is destroyed, and it takes down the rich with the poor as well, which obviously is a metaphor for our world right now with climate change. All the rich people that are propagating climate change, all the big corporations and people who think they're going to be above the consequences will not be. We're all in one world and we're all in it together. So, I think that I think the films, I try to keep them from being preachy. I try to keep them from being too on the nose. But the message is there if you want to see it. And I think it's consistent about the power of the individual, the strength of women, my kind of jaundiced view of organizational systems and authority. Being a child of the 60s, I have an innate dislike for authority.